Hello, it is Aaron from the Fandom Portals podcast, guys, and I'm joined by a very special guest today. This is Christine Giver. She is the creator, producer, host of Outside the Box podcast, which began in 2022, and the podcast is award nominated, and she's also had the pleasure of having guests on the show, including people from BattleBots, STEM enthusiasts, and people from the gaming and entertainment world. She's very passionate about all things nerdy, and she also hosts the spin-off podcast Talking Nerdy, and she is joining us here today to have a chat about some of our favorite fandoms. How are you going today, Christine?
I am doing great. I'm very excited to talk about a wide variety of things on my show, but this is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, I guess.
That's awesome, and I can't wait to dive into it as well. Before we do, though, did you want to give our listeners a little bit of an explanation on what Outside of the Box podcast is? And it's obviously on YouTube as well. Did you want to give us a brief rundown?
Sure. So it started out just as an idea as somebody who's a very big enthusiast on like BattleBots. I mean, really, it just started out with BattleBots because I didn't know that there was a whole world of combat robotics outside of that. So I quickly learned kind of the more I got involved in the community, and it grew from that into just STEM content as a whole, then into like some of my other nerdy passions. So I've just kind of broadened my scope, inclusive of, all of the things that I really enjoy.
That's so awesome. It's great to have an outlet. That's exactly why I created this as well, because I have so many passions and interests and I just want to talk about them all the time. So I can definitely relate. If you guys wanted to check out Outside of the Box podcast, it's going to be in the show notes below for you guys to check out. So make sure you go and support Christine and check out some STEM and some BattleBots stuff as well. So we're here today because you reached out on a Threads post, filled out the guest application, and you picked the topic of the Endgame movie, Avengers Endgame, particularly the portals scene or the climax of the long-standing MCU Infinity Saga, which I think is, in my opinion, a really, really great culmination to a 22 movie sort of saga. I guess my first question for you, and probably one that is commonly asked or was very commonly asked around, 2018, 2019, is like, where were you when Thanos snapped his fingers? Like it's something that everybody kind of watched and saw and just was absolutely taken aback by the fact that they had built some of these characters up for so long, and then in literally the snap of a finger, some of them were just dusted away. So where were you, Christine? How did you experience that?
So, I mean, I saw both of these films in the theater, obviously, as quickly as I possibly could, because, unfortunately, there are people who will spoil things, and
Yep.
I don't want to know. The really interesting thing is that, I was a comic kid when I grew up, but not those comics. I would say I was probably focused on X-Men the most, so I didn't really know that much about any of these characters movies. And so there were people that had read the comics that maybe knew some things that I didn't. So I was going into this completely okay, taking it at face value. And when you watch a superhero film, the expectation is that bad things are going to happen. People may die, but at the end, you come to a positive conclusion and the good guys win. So I'm sitting there in this theater and watching the end of the movie, and I'm like, surely this is going to work. Like, they're going to figure this out and they're going to stop Thanos and nothing bad is going to happen. And then he snaps his fingers and people start dusting away. And I'm sitting there literally in shock, thinking to myself, what is happening? Like, there has to be something else at the end of this movie where they reverse all of this, because I didn't know at the time that there was a second movie.
Oh my gosh.
I thought this is it. Like, this is everything. And I'm just like, what is going on? And then the credits roll and I'm like, I don't think I can speak. I was just literally in shock. And I don't think that I've ever felt that way at the end of any movie that I've ever seen in my entire life. It was just you could feel the air sucked out of the theater, and everybody's just sitting there like, what? So it's something that I will never ever forget.
No, I can definitely agree because I had a similar experience. Obviously, I'm in Australia, you're in America, but same experience, you know, and that's like the cultural phenomenon of these kind of movies that they're global, and the experience that you have in the cinema as well is probably something that isn't happening that much anymore as well, which is why I think it's like it's also so special for me when you experience something like that collectively as a group in a theater. But I too remember being just completely gobsmacked at the fact that these characters were just dusting away. And then, as you said, credits roll, and you always sit there for that end credits scene in a Marvel movie, and you know, you just really, really want to see some of those characters come back. That was in April of 2018, and then the Avengers Endgame actually sort of didn't release for a whole nother year. So as you said before, during that time, you know, lots of people go on the internet and do the thing that they do, and sometimes they do spoil, but it actually sort of started to create this cultural phenomenon. And I don't know if you remember like a hashtag going around that was like, don't spoil the end game. It was just like a crazy time in sort of pop culture, and everybody was just sort of waiting to see what happened and leaning on all of the different sort of news stories, trying to find out anything that they could. There was also sort of no marketing for the movie as well, which I found a little bit sort of weird. But having read articles, they kind of said, you know, like everybody's here for the end game. We kind of want people to experience this at face value, to come in and just conclude the saga that they've been living through for the last 11 years. So speaking of this cultural phenomenon, did you want to sort of get into a little bit about what you think makes this sort of endgame movie so popular for so many people?
I mean, I think it's just in general, like, I don't think that I can think of a series of movies like in my lifetime that's been just done so well. And this being the culmination of like all of that, I think that that's why it's so special, because they were able to put together a continuous story where everything tied in together so well. And I think that's a very difficult thing to achieve, you know, and having watched all of these movies and followed all of these movies, to kind of see that come together in this really one. I mean, I personally, I even think that these movies, Infinity War and Endgame, surpass the original Avengers movie as like a great thing to watch. I mean, not that it wasn't good, like it was really cool to see all of those characters together in the same movie, but I going through every movie that they had up to that point and kind of taking you on this very good storytelling and like an emotional journey to wind up in the end like that. I think that's what makes it so special. I mean, people might hate on me for this, but I don't even think that Star Wars did it that well,
Yeah.
personally. So
I actually wanted to talk to you about that as well, in terms of like culminating things that happened in 2019 or 2019. The Rise of Skywalker came out the same sort of year, which is a 9-movie ending arc through lots and lots of years of Star Wars. Arguably, I do also believe that, you know, the Avengers sort of did it better than Star Wars did. And I think personally for me, like that comes down to what they were able to do in their movies with the characters that they did. I feel like they had like a story that they wanted to tell, and they stuck to that. Whereas Star Wars, they played a lot of to the fan bases that were loud and really just wanted to see the movie they wanted to see. In terms of you know, the lead up, the Infinity Saga probably best encapsulates the 6 characters that are in Endgame and Infinity War. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey with those sort of 6 characters as we get towards the end game, and why you were so connected when it came that climax?
yeah, for sure. I mean, what's weird is like of those 6 characters, I mean, there's probably some that I feel a little bit more connected to than others that I thought were maybe a little bit better to find. I mean, you can't, I don't think that you can not talk about like the Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, and
Yeah.
like that was the first movie that kind of started everything. And I think the entire series really hinged on him as Iron Man and how much people believed him as that character and liked him as that character. I think if that first movie doesn't do as well as it did, you just don't have the rest of it. It just doesn't happen. And I think that's kind of like so fitting why he was like basically the central character in those movies. So, I mean, I don't think that you could have found a better person. I think it's funny because of the whole Civil War situation that Captain America similarly. Like, I don't think that I could have seen anybody but Chris Evans in that role and how well he played Captain America. So, I mean, like, to have those two very pivotal characters being so strong, I think was essential. And, people being able to connect with them kind of throughout. I mean, I like you can say that about any character really of those six. I think that they were all just so well cast in their roles, as most of the folks in the MCU. But it's funny, people don't necessarily think as much about like Black Widow, Hawkeye. They're considered more minor characters because like Iron Man and Captain America are like the big two, I guess, in most people's minds. But I think that especially in those movies as well, in Infinity War and Endgame, that they were such pivotal characters with the Soul Stone, situation and everything. And there was so much emotion like in that scene.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, no matter how this turns out, it's going to be really, really sad. So I mean, like, you I don't think you can say enough about any of them. Like, they're just all so amazing. And I think like even though some of them had maybe less of a role in all of the movies leading up to that, maybe didn't have their own movie, have their own series at the time, I still think like that core is what really made the movies as good as they were.
Yeah, I 100% agree as well. And talking about those emotional moments, this Endgame movie is sort of packed with it, coming full circle. With Chris Evans as Captain America always being the character to do the right thing for the community and serve, and then Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man kind of being the arrogant, self-serving character, and then towards the end of this Infinity Saga, obviously the ending with Iron Man making his ultimate sacrifice is a very sort of sacrificial thing to do for everybody else, which is completely opposite to how he started as the character, and you just see that growth all the way through. And I agree with what you said about the moment between Hawkeye and Black Widow with the Soul Stone, because the whole time I was sitting there thinking, surely they pull off something. Like they'll get Red Skull and push him down or something like that. I don't know. I just did not believe that the Russo brothers who directed the film would go that far, which again plays to that sort of not trying to please the fans with everything they do and not being afraid to make decisions like that in order to just keep the story going and keep the stakes high. So I really love that about the film too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult because, like, even though it was upsetting, I also understood it. Like, when I watch a movie, I fully understand where I'm like, okay, this makes sense for this character's story arc, and I don't think that they could have really gone any further with this character, and it made more sense to like put that really strong emotional impact in there. So I hate it, but I can't hate it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree as well. And then obviously that ending with Robert Downey Jr.'s sacrifice. Initially, when you saw that, how did you feel about that when he took the stones, snapped his fingers, and did everything that he did for the rest of the world, basically, to save it?
Again, so hard because like my partner loves Iron Man and identifies very strongly with that character. It, like, in a weird way, seeing him die, it was like, it felt very personal to me, but at the same time, like, I understood why it had to happen. I think like given that everything started with Iron Man, I think it had to end with Iron Man. And so it made complete sense. And, again, hard to watch, completely understandable.
Yeah, especially because they built up his character in that 5 year gap, the blip as they call it in the MCU, as him literally like settling down. He had a cottage out in the woods. It was by the lakeside. He married Pepper. They were living the quiet life, and he had a daughter. And "I love you 3000" is just something that is quoted all around. And then they go and they pull those heartstrings at the end as well. So, and that left an impact on the MCU that has traveled through the following saga as well. Let's move on to that sort of climactic scene, that portal scene. We talked a little bit through messaging about how we don't believe that scene or this climax will ever be topped in cinema. Can you explain a little bit about what you meant by that?
Sure. So the reason why I say that is because up to that point, with everything that had happened in Infinity War and the earlier part of Endgame, I felt like I personally went through all of the stages of grief up to that
Mm.
point. Like it was such emotional, like just up and down all over the place. And you're wanting something really good to happen. And I don't know if, like, because you get brought down to such a low place of feeling like, oh my gosh, like all of these characters are gone, and, that you don't expect the high can be that high. Like, something good has to happen, but you don't expect that.
Mm.
And it was just like, I still, every time watch that scene or even think about that scene, I get chills and like all the hair stands up on my arms because it was such a high to come up off of such crazy lows. And so I think that's why it's hard to top, because it would be hard for any other film or any other series to take you on that type of emotional journey where you're like devastated and then this amazing thing happens that you're not
Mm.
expecting. And so like that would be very challenging to replicate.
I agree, and I think the 11-year span and the 22 movies previous to this really helped sort of build those characters. But I feel like they also did a great job within this movie about, reminding you of some of the good points that has happened through the MCU saga, the Infinity Saga so far, with the time heist section in the middle. They revisited all those favorite sort of parts, and they were able to see New York in three different perspectives and go and recollect those stones. And you sort of remember, sitting down in the first Avengers movie when you went and watched that, and you see all the different scenes, and it brings you back to that sort of nostalgia. And then towards the end, they also did a really amazing things like the soundtrack during that as well. I don't know about you, but that silence between when Captain America was sort of standing there and he hears the clicking of the radio, it's almost like, again, that breath holding moment, and then the passing on the left. And there were so many full circle moments like that that really just sort of played to everybody's arcs just coming to a really nice close. I agree that I think it was a really high climax, but I also feel like, as we suggested and said, like it's hard to top. And I don't know about you, but having watched and seen some of the MCU things since, they haven't really measured up. Did you want to explain why you think some of those sort of later additions to the MCU don't really match up to the hype that is Endgame, Infinity War, and the Infinity Saga, the one that came first?
Sure. So some of those later films or, TV series, they've done quite a lot and a pretty wide range of things. Honestly, for a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, I really don't think is as bad as what people kind of have portrayed that they are. There were a lot of those films and TV series that I quite liked.
Yeah.
But it's more an understanding of that I get why maybe it is hard for people to move on from that, because like especially with like the TV series, it's really hard to kind of match that level of emotion. And even with the movies, like I think that they tried to do it in some parts, especially the latest Spider-Man movie, bringing back Tobey Maguire, bringing back Andrew Garfield. I think people were excited about that, but I think people also expected it. So, but before I saw the movie, I had a good idea that was probably going to happen. Which again kind of sucks for spoilers, but it also like it takes away that shock factor. And I think that from what I've read about it, Infinity War and Endgame had like the highest level of secrecy of any films that they've ever done. I mean, I think Robert Downey Jr. is the only one that received the entire script. Other people received like partial scripts or false scripts or whatever. So like there was a lot of stuff that was kept under wraps that people didn't know. But unfortunately, with some of these newer films, like stuff leaked and people knew stuff, and so they went into it expecting to see certain things. I'm really glad that so far, and we'll probably get into that there hasn't been a ton leaked, I feel, for Deadpool versus Wolverine. I mean, there are certain things, but there's still some air of mystery. So I'm hoping to be surprised. But I think that's probably a big part of it, is just the lack of just like that significant emotional journey and also as much surprise.
I also think, as we were talking before about the six main characters, they kind of, I feel, don't really have that in this second phase, because they did. It was the changing nature of sort of cinema and media as well, because they obviously moved into the Disney Plus series, so you're getting more content over the year as well, and you're meeting all these new people, and you're getting 3 or 4 movies in the year as well. But there wasn't really that core sort of group of characters that people can get attached to as they go throughout. That being said, I think we're only about 5 or 6 years into this next phase, and the first one took 11 years to develop. So maybe across this next 6 years, they're going to trajectory it in a way that's sort of appeasing to everybody, and they're going to make some sort of highlighting characters. I did like what you mentioned before about the Deadpool and Wolverine. We did chat a little bit and say that, this might be the thing that sort of brings the MCU back, or at least sort of re-encapsulates that feeling that we were describing about being in the cinema with a group of people and experiencing something that is definitely pop culturally significant. Give us a little rundown of your thoughts about what's occurring with Deadpool and Wolverine so far.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of interesting things about this. Probably most notably that, with bringing Hugh Jackman as Wolverine back when, people thought that wasn't going to happen. I think he said after he was killed off in Logan that wasn't going to happen. But, understanding that this is potentially a different version of that character, it's not the same timeline. So there's kind of that piece of it in play. But it's still exciting to see me, who I think was the best character in any of the X-Men movies, coming back and pairing with Deadpool, who is definitely an interesting character in that I think with most of the MCU movies, it's stuff that you could probably take your older kids to. And, it was fine. It was a little bit more friendly. Deadpool is definitely not family friendly. So it's something that's very enjoyable for the adults. And again, I think something like this comes down to just phenomenal casting.
Yeah.
And the most interesting thing, as we know about that, is that Ryan Reynolds did play a different version of Deadpool in an earlier Wolverine movie that was not good. It was not good at all. And so to see him be able to play that character in the current iteration and do it so freaking well, I think that is what makes the Deadpool movie so successful, is because Ryan Reynolds understands who that character is and knows how to play it to a T. And it's a different kind of emotion. It's not the same like emotions in Infinity War and Endgame. It's more humor based. Not to say that there's no emotion in the Deadpool movies, because there is, but it's definitely more you go to have a good time and to laugh, and just it's pure joy and excitement. So it's a very different type of emotion than what we've experienced.
Yeah, and I think that the pairing of those two as well, Wolverine being the sort of anti-hero, gruff, grumpy dude demeanor that he is, and then Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool being, the exact opposite of that. That's just a pairing that really works well. It kind of cooks, I think people are kind of down to see that as well. Obviously, with the history that they've had with Wolverine, the few movies that they've had with Deadpool, and this all coming together. Now, in the Deadpool and sort of Wolverine, we talked about spoilers. There are some things that has been released in terms of characters that may appear. Sort of, I believe they've been done to sort of garner some sort of excitement. Did you want to have a chat about? Because I don't want to tell you what I know, just in case I spoil it for you. But if you wanted to, and you wanted to talk about some of the things that you have seen in terms of returning characters and how you think that might impact people's experience at the cinema.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of that has been shown, pretty widely. So if people don't know some of these things, I think you've been living under a rock. But,
exactly.
Clearly, like, there's going to be some original X-Men characters coming back, played by their original actors, which I think is really exciting because, again, as I mentioned earlier, X-Men, that was a comic that I paid attention to when I was a kid. I grew up with the original X-Men cartoon series. And so these are characters that mean a lot to me. And original X-Men film they started to get less good, and then they started to get a little bit better again. It was very interesting for me, but I'm excited to potentially see some of these characters that I think maybe could have been had a better treatment in the earlier movies come back and maybe get to be a little bit better. I would say most notably Pyro. Obviously, we
Yeah.
see an older version of Pyro coming back, and also Sabretooth played by the same original actor. And like, it's crazy to watch
Yeah.
that trailer and be like, he looks exactly the same.
I
Like,
know.
you know how many years have passed and
Yep.
he looks the same.
That's crazy. That's some healing factor stuff right there.
Exactly. So, and really, that it's. I guess it depends on like who you are and what you like. But I like that version of Sabretooth. I did not like the whole Victor Creed thing like that. I didn't.
Oh,
like
in the
it.
Origins. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I like this version of Sabretooth. I'm down with that. And I'm, there's obviously rumored to be a lot more. It's like who else from the MCU might pop in, because this is supposedly all kind of leading towards Secret Wars. So, there's a lot of rumors, and this kind of goes back to the whole Infinity War Endgame thing, because there's like, will they have Iron Man maybe just randomly in there? Because, Robert Downey Jr. previously said, I'm not going to do that again. But then I've heard some things recently where he sounded less that he wouldn't do it again. So it's like, what if that happened?
Yeah.
Like, I would jump out of my seat. I would literally scream.
I think I would too. Very like unapologetic way to everybody in the cinema as well. But yeah, I'm very excited to see that movie as well. I think a lot of the cameos that are going to happen do, like, it sort of brings back the old sort of 20th century sort of Fox movies, as you were talking about with the X-Men, and then bringing it into this new sort of Sony universe as well. But then we've seen images of like the Doctor Strange portal in the trailers, and every time we've seen that, the destination that they're jumping to has been completely whited out. So I want to ask you, Christine, where do you think they're going? Where are they going when they jump through that portal?
That's a good question. Well, there's also like the whole TVA portals, like because they've talked about that too. I mean, this clearly, when you watch the trailer, there's clearly some tie-in to the Loki TV show and the TVA. There absolutely is, without a doubt, which I'm excited about, because personally, of the TV series that they've done, Loki is hands down my favorite of all of those series. I mean, it all goes back to casting. Like, Tom Hiddleston and Loki is just so good. Like, he's supposed to be a villain, and I'm like, I like that character. Like, you've made me like this character. This isn't fair. So, but of course, like, if you've watched that TV series, you know that he goes through his own character arc of like, not being so bad anymore. Seeing what they do with that and the TVA, which I really hope that this kind of, I don't want to say fixes that.
Yeah, like prune some of the edges, I guess you could say, of the multi.
Yeah, because I don't know that I really loved everything that they did with that piece of it, and with Kang, like, and like what they did in Quantumania with that. Like, I just don't know that I 100% love that. So I'm hoping that they can utilize the TVA in maybe a better way in this movie.
I think if we look at this sort of saga of the MCU compared to the Infinity Saga, the biggest difference that I can see is I feel like that first saga had that clear direction all the way to Infinity War and Endgame, whereas this saga, I feel like they're putting out so much content that it's hard to deliver it back to that climactic sort of in-game experience that we were talking about before, which I really hope they do in the Wolverine or Deadpool and Wolverine movie. I hope they sort of prune those edges and bring it back to something that they can tangibly sort of move toward a conclusion. So if we're talking about, Deadpool and Wolverine moving into sort of the Endgame space, there has been some rumors that perhaps, Wolverine and Deadpool will jump into that battle that we were talking about in the Endgame sort of space. So if we go back to talk about that battle, what are some of the moments from that Endgame fight scene that you kind of remember as being really sort of poignant to you, that was like a yeehaw kind of moment that really got fans sort of out of their seats when you were watching it in the cinema?
I mean, I don't know that it's arguable, because to me it seems pretty obvious that like the biggest moment, aside from the portals and the whole thing, was Cap wielding Mjolnir. I mean, like that, it's like part of everybody knew, like always knew that he could, because this kind of goes back to the scene where he tried to pick it up and it moved a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of debate as to whether he knew at that time that he could pick it up and just didn't want to do it. Like, didn't want to one up Thor or whatever the case may be, because he's a nice guy. So I think I lean on the side is that he probably always could, and just in that moment decided to do it, because I mean, if anybody's worthy, it's probably Cap.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. He's the best of us.
so that was obviously a really great moment. Yeah, aside from the portals, I mean, I think Scarlet Witch just dominating Thanos, at least for a while. It's like one of those things that you knew from that point that there was going to be something, like kind of where that would lead. And as we could see in like the later series and films with WandaVision, and then also the Doctor Strange film, like she's obviously hella powerful.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I actually think that they could kind of lean into her as a main villain of a saga, you know? Like she's got that potential, that reality altering power. It'll be interesting to see what Agatha All Along will bring to her sort of story arc as well. A lot of mystery sort of surrounding that one too, with all the name changes and things on social media. I don't know if you saw that, but they finally settled on the Agatha All Along. But yeah, definitely Scarlet Witch during that scene was kind of the first time you saw her exhibiting that raw kind of chaotic power, and almost to the point where you're just like, oh crap, you know, she's actually got something there. Yeah, I think I really liked the hot potato with the gauntlet where they were just passing it around and everybody sort of got a turn. That was really good too. Going back to that emotionality that we were talking about earlier with the scene with everybody sort of gathered around the house, you know, and it pans through slowly and you see at the very end of this Endgame movie, Captain America, as we said, the best of us, and he's an old man and he's sitting on that bench and he sort of passes the torch on. And it's that sort of symbolic nature of things in this Endgame movie that really like hit home for me as a fan. And moving forward, it gave me hope for the MCU, you know, bringing these stories forward as well. So in terms of like your favorite moment, I will say, of the Infinity War Endgame sort of climax to the Infinity Saga, mine being, you know, Captain America finally getting his dance with Peggy and growing old. That was my favorite. Well, what was yours, Christine?
I mean, that's great. Like it is. It's hard for me to not say the portal scene, but I mean, also kind of it's weird, but like the funeral scene is a pretty strong moment, because it was just so. I mean, I was just in tears during that, because it's like you realize there's a finality to it. Like even just showing Iron Man dying, I don't think that it really gives that finality. But that scene, I think, does. You know, showing everybody together and like grieving, and it's like, okay, like he's really gone. This isn't fake. Like he's really gone. So I mean, it's a strong scene. It's not a happy scene, but like it really left an impression on me, I think, at the end of that movie.
No, that's really good. I definitely agree. I think that's emotionally powerful, especially coming off the back of like Black Widow's death as well. So you're down and then you're up with the portal scene and everybody's back and then you're down again, and it's just that emotional roller coaster. And then everything that's come from that end game, you know, that happened 5 years ago, and I still see things on the internet from like memes and things like that from the end game experience as well. You know, we talked earlier about some of the quotes that are from the movie that they're really kind of memorable. So it's definitely left its mark on pop culture, or at least it has in my opinion.
I would be curious, and there may be an interview out there, who knows, if some of the things that would later be referenced were like, what came first? Did some of these references happen in the past and then they decided to call back on them? Or when they referenced them in the first place, did they have the intention on carrying that through? So one of those things is with, like you mentioned, Captain America. And as we'll see, like, he passes the Captain America torch to Sam Wilson. But this was like a long time coming type of thing, you know, as we've seen the previous movie where there was the scene of them running and, you know, like trying to race each other. And there's the whole on your left thing, which later comes back in the portal scene. And then, you know, the fact that he passes the torch to Sam later, it's like, did they make that original scene in the movie with the intention of calling it back later, or when they decided to write, Endgame and an Infinity War, did they look at that previous scene and then decide to put that in? And I mean, to me, everything is so intentionally crafted, everything that they do, that it really makes me feel like they kind of always had that intention to reference it at a later point, especially for such a really strong, powerful scene. So, I mean, I could think of endless callbacks where I'm like, here's this thing that they used later on that was from something earlier. And I think that's what makes these movies so great, is because everything feels so intentionally done. And I think that's a big part of why it's able to be so impactful.
Even to the point, like the first Iron Man movie, at the end, he says, I am Iron Man. And the very last thing that he says, that callback was, he says, I am inevitable. And he says, well, I am Iron Man. And that's that complete full circle. So you're seeing all of these full circle moments happen for all of these characters, even like the Hulk. A lot of his development happened over the 5-year blip gap, but he was always struggling with the angry side of him versus, the Banner side of him. And he finally found a way to balance it to the point where, he goes and he tries that gauntlet on that they made for the first time. And he's like, I was built for this. And it's almost like that acceptance for him as the character sort of came full circle upon his sort of journey as well. And you can see that happening countless amounts of times with Thor and his mum, for example, when he calls back Mjolnir and he says, I am still worthy, like after he's just had that hard time after losing everybody. There's all those full circle moments, and I think that's what makes this movie really great as well. All right, Christine, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the Fandom Portals podcast. It's been amazing to chat with you about all the things that we love in terms of the MCU. If you guys want to go and check out the Out of the Box podcast or Talking Nerdy, you can find those in the show notes below. We'll leave links for those. So thanks for joining me, Christine. It's been amazing.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
All right, and we'll see you guys next time.